Hello, good afternoon. How is everyone? Great, good. Good, you've had a great second day of the summit so far? Yes, okay. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the feedback that we've been receiving. We are definitely open to all the feedback. The things that you're finding are inviting and that you're enjoying, and also places where we might improve. So we already know that we need to do swag for next year. So we're going to put that into our budget, so thank you for that. You know, today has been a very, very special day. We started off with Rebecca Peterson, who really helped us kind of really think about being mindful and the practice of joy and thinking about how to find the acts of joy in each and everything that we do every day and how that then transfers to our students and to our learning environment and the people that we work with. It was so beautiful. She did such an amazing job. We then had an opportunity to go and hear from some of our subject matter experts, some of our collaborators, our partners, to do hands-on work around key areas in life on a sustainable planet, our STEM education, reckoning with our racial past, and also integrated arts. And we are going to have a great closing session. You know, what we've been trying to do over the course of the summit is center this conversation around belonging and the importance of helping to create space and opportunity for stories and connection to those stories. And so we have a great opportunity to do that this afternoon. But before we get into that, let me just do a couple of quick housekeeping things. I first want to just say that we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather today, and that we are grateful to be able to be here and host this summit. And we want to just recognize the diverse Native communities who make their homes across the nation today. I also just want to remind people that we have our ASL interpreters, our fabulous ladies who have been with us all day and online, helping to make sure that we have ASL available. Yes, let's please give them a round of applause. If you need any further accommodations, please let us know. Somebody in a blue shirt here in person, or send us a message online and we'll make sure that you have what you need to participate fully. I've also been remiss because I haven't formally thanked our volunteers. We have a cadre of volunteers who have joined us to help with the summit, and I want to just give them a round of applause really quick. And once again, thank you to our sponsors who have made this event possible. So now for the exciting part of the afternoon. I could not be more happy. About a year ago, we put out a call to our education community and said, hey, we're thinking about keynote speakers for next year. If you guys have any suggestions, please let us know. And Andrea Kim Neighbors came to us. She said, I think I have the great person for you. And we were like, well, who's this? And they're like, Maulik Pancholy. I'm like, well, I don't know if he would do that for us. Like, if we could get him to come. You know, he's probably kind of busy. But we reached out right away. He said yes. He said, it's an important conversation. I'd love to be here and be part of it. And we're so honored because Maulik has done a tremendous job raising voice and bringing awareness to issues of Asian Americans in all sectors, education, theater, film. And he continues to use his voice to help to tell the story of importance of inclusion and access. He also uses this platform for a very important message around anti-bullying, which I'll let him explore in more detail. But the work that he is doing is really transformative, and we're so grateful to have his participation in the summit this year. I just have to brag on this woman a little bit. Andrea Kim Neighbors is, yes. Yes, you already know. So Andrea Kim Neighbors is our 2023 Smithsonian Educator of the Year. And she earned that title because she is such a dedicated, passionate educator who thinks so carefully about the learning experience, about the connections that people are making, and about how to meet people where they are. And so I have the great pleasure of welcoming them both to the stage to join us for our closing keynote. Help me welcome them.
Thank you so much, Monique. Such a generous introduction. Welcome. Hello, everybody. How are you? Good. Thank you all for being here. It's such an honor to be in this space with all of you. Thank you for being a part of the Smithsonian National Education Summit. Thank you, Maulik, for being here with us, and thank you for accepting the invitation to be a part of this.
Thank you for asking me. I didn't realize that you were so instrumental in making that happen.
Yeah,
so
surprise.
I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful.
I'm very excited to be on the stage with you and to be in conversation with you. I've looked up to your work as an actor, author, and activist for so long, and so this is a huge honor. And I'm so glad that we all get to be in conversation together. Just a quick housekeeping note before we get started with our conversation. We will be taking questions toward the end. My good friend Ashley Naranjo and the amazing team in these fabulous blue t-shirts have index cards where you can write down questions. And for those who are watching online, please, we look forward to receiving your questions as well. So let's get started. Stories, as Monique shared, are a big driver in our work, in the work that we do with communities, and you are a storyteller yourself in so many different ways. So stories and the act of storytelling and the art of storytelling are at the heart of your work and the multifaceted career that you have shaped. Stories always have an origin, and I'd love to go back in time to young Maulik and invite you to share with us who you were as a young person. So what was young Maulik like?
Well, I want to say a lot of wonderful things about myself, but my mom and my sister are in the front row, and I feel like they might beg to differ about the things that I might say. But young Maulik, who was I? Well, I just want to preface this by saying, as young Maulik, my mom, but now I'm going to direct everything to my mom and sister since they're here.
Yes,
my
moms.
mom tells me that when I was 5, that I was saying that I wanted to be an actor, and I don't fully know what that. Thank you for laughing at that. It did work out. Luckily. But I feel like that's like a good frame of reference especially for what we're talking about here today. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking when I was that young in terms of wanting to be an actor, but I do think, looking back on it and after years of psychotherapy, that, and I don't mean to make fun of mental health, it's just the truth, that I do think there's a sense of like, was a little bit of uncomfortable in my own skin as a kid, and the idea of getting to step into someone else's world and become somebody else felt very, like on a visceral level, very enticing for me, you know? What else can I tell you about me as a kid? I was a really good student. I was an overachiever. I got straight A's, and everyone was like, "Well, you should consider being a mathematician or a doctor." And I was like, "I'm gonna be an actor, but I'm gonna get all A's." You know, like I was that kid. I'm trying to think what else might be good to share about me as a kid. I do have this sort of memory of myself. Obviously not when I was 5, because I don't know if I can't remember really what I had for breakfast yesterday anymore. But a sense of like watching TV and being sort of in wonder of what that was like, of reading books. I read a lot of books as a kid. I feel like stories and the imagination were super present for me as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As a kid, being in that space of seeing, watching television, reading great books, enjoying school, it seems. What were your hopes and dreams as you were taking all this in and kind of envisioning, who you want to be and who you are?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was that kid who probably practiced an Oscar acceptance speech in the mirror. That hasn't happened yet. My hopes and dreams, I mean, I was like an awkward kid, I was nerdy, I was scrawny, I wasn't good at sports. I didn't fit into like the things that were cool for kids back then. I think I visit a lot of middle schools now with like my books and with the anti-bullying work, and I think school's still really tough, and I'm sure that I'm speaking to an audience of educators who know how hard it is for students out there. But I also see, when I go to middle schools now, I do see a little bit more individuality in students. At my school, I felt like there was a sense of everyone kind of had to be the same to fit in. And so honestly, as a kid, I think a lot of my hopes and dreams for that, just like that particular time in my life, were like, how can I fit in? How can I belong? What do I have to do to earn sort of the love and admiration of my peers? And I think that messaging for myself, that I got it wrong. As a kid, and I mean, it worked out, I think, so maybe I had it right for what it needed to be at the time, but I think that messaging for myself was like, you need to be less this, less these parts of yourself, and more these things that were not true to my identity. Trying to be more white. I remember as a kid literally like being like, I gotta put on more sunblock and like put sun in my hair. So I was like trying to get sun on my hair but not sun on my body, which is like, that was challenging. It didn't really work out. And certainly around sexuality, like I think I knew at a very early age that I was different, that when other boys were having crushes on girls at school, that I was having crushes on boys, and that felt like a liability, that it felt dangerous. And so this idea that I had to be, I don't mean to paint a bleak picture, I had hopes and dreams. I was going to win that Oscar. It hasn't happened yet, but I did have, I had a lot of joy, I think, in my life. But I do think there was a pervasive sense of the big hope was like, how can I just fit in? How can I just belong?
Middle school years can be tough. I had some tough middle school years as well.
Yeah.
And that question of belonging, do I belong? Who thinks I belong? Especially among your peers is huge. It leaves long-lasting impacts on you.
Yeah.
And thinking about adults and mentors in your life, who were your mentors around this time, and who did you look up to?
Yeah, my mom. I did. My mentors in my life. I was that kid who was like, I want to do community theater. We lived in Tampa, Florida. And there was a moment in the 80s when everyone thought Orlando was going to be the next big place where like all the movies were made in Orlando. And I would literally go through the yellow pages, where I think I'm old, but I'd go through the yellow pages and be like, I found a talent agency in Orlando. And my mom would drive me out there because I was very lucky to have a lot of support. But around that time, I also was taking a lot of like community theater acting classes. There was a woman named Bobby Evers who I took classes with who was really, she helped shape a lot of things for me. My high school drama teacher, Michael Locklear, was a big one. But there was a woman named Kathy Grau who directed a community theater play that I was in, and then later taught in the middle school and high school at my school. And she, I say this to kids all the time, and it's true. She was the first person, a teacher, I think that's important to stress in this auditorium, a teacher who said, you're funny, you're talented, and who also made me believe that even though I rarely saw myself, if ever, in the stories around me, that if I wanted to be an actor, I could. And she was a mentor. She was the person who stayed after school with me and was like, we're going to work on a monologue together. We actually wrote a monologue together and then got disqualified from the Florida State Thespian Festival because you weren't allowed to write your own material, which is crazy. I was like, talk about squashing creativity. Florida! Sorry, I don't know if that's okay to say.
Do you remember what that monologue was?
I just want to get controversial as quickly as possible. I believe that monologue, by the way, she knew me so well, was coded gay monologue. I was not out, and it took me many, 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 many years to come out. But I remember there was a moment where we made fun of strangers on a train, and I feel like there was something very gay about it. And by the way, I won the Florida State Thespian Festival, and then they took the award away. And I just want to throw that out there because it's probably going to color the rest of our conversation around what's happening in the world right now with the way stories are being ripped off of shelves.
I hope at some point that award just shows up in your
I hope so. Florida State Thespian Festival. If it's not an Oscar, can it be the Florida State Thespian Festival?
We're putting it out there. So something we all know and something we say a lot is that representation matters.
Yeah.
And it can deeply impact people, especially young people, seeing themselves on the screen, in books, the arts, in sports, science, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. So what does representation mean to you?
Yeah, this is such a great question. We were talking about this a little bit before, and I was aware of representation, I think, much later. Like I didn't even actually really realize that I had a lack of representation as a kid because I just assumed that the world was populated with stories of people who didn't look like me or who didn't go through the same experiences I did. And it wasn't that I didn't relate to those stories. I loved books as a kid. I remember for some reason I had a lot of sets of books. So I had like the Black Stallion books and the Lord of the Rings books and the Little House on the Prairie books. And my life didn't look at all like Laura Ingalls Wilder. But I was like, I get it. Like, it is hard out here on the farm. Like, I related to those experiences. But what I also didn't realize was by allowing myself to fully be like, oh, that experience is mine, there was this other piece of it where I was kind of erasing my own existence because I never saw my story in books. And I feel like this is an important note because I feel like when we talk about diverse stories, particularly like in the classroom or in libraries, it's not that kids can only see stories about themselves. I love Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I was like, oh my God, Mary went blind, like all that stuff was like so moving to me. But never seeing myself in a story made me think that there was something wrong with my story because why was no one telling it? And so over the years, from like middle school to high school to college, I'd kind of worked really hard on erasing my own identity. This is a very long answer to your question, but by the time I got to college, I was studying theater and I was studying, great playwrights like Chekhov and Shakespeare and Moliere and they were all white. And I was playing all these white characters. And then when I moved out to LA, I was like, well, I'm going to be a movie star. And the first TV job I ever got was playing the foreign exchange student with a turban on my head in an Indian accent and making fun of my own culture because that's all casting directors saw in me. And I was like, oh, and I think that was like a real moment for me where I was like, oh, this is not the representation I want to put into the world because my story is in fact bigger than this. And that was, I think, maybe the first time that I started to realize that we have a responsibility to represent things in stories because they have real impact.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
Sorry, that was such a long answer.
No, that's a beautiful
Halfway
answer.
Through, I forgot the question, but I got back.
That was great. Earlier, we were having a conversation about representation. I just imagine both of us as young kids in the 80s watching TV and books. And for me, it was Keanu Reeves and Claudia Kishi from the Babysitters Club. And it was very limited at the time, but they stick with you. And obviously, we've carried these people, these images, these stories with us everywhere.
And by the way, when we were talking about that, I was like, I can't actually fully remember. I mean, I think it was like Short Circuit, which was a white actor in brown face, Apu on The Simpsons, which was a white actor in brown voice, I didn't really know who that was. And in a way, and by the way, as you all know, there's a major writer's strike and an actor strike going on, and part of the rules of that are not to talk specifically about promoting work. But I do feel that some of the work I got to do later on, I got to see firsthand how that representation impacted other people before I think I ever got to feel the impacts of seeing myself represented.
Something you shared earlier was taking on kind of a stereotypical role when you're, starting as an actor. So as an actor, what kinds of stories did you seek? And what stories resonated with you most? And I guess now, to kind of bring it into the present, what do you seek and what resonates with you?
So early on, and I remember there was like a group, when I first moved to LA, there was a group of South Asian American actors, and we'd get together at this one person's apartment, and we'd all sit around being like, there are no parts, and what are we gonna do? And then like one part would come along, and it felt a little bit like scraping the bottom of the barrel, like trying to just find something to work on. And what that led to is when I started getting cast in parts that didn't have South Asian names, it felt like a victory. I was like, wow, they didn't even want one of us, and I got it. Like this sense of like, wow, now I've really made it. But now I look back at that, and by the way, I'm grateful for all of those parts that I played. They were life-changing and have afforded me to do a lot. And but I realized that the thinking behind that is not so great because it's another form of erasing your identity to say that the only way I can work in this business is by erasing a part of myself so that the whole world sees me as insert name, Now I feel like that's shifted for me. Like first of all, I've become more of a storyteller, I think, than an actor for hire. With my books, we are actively in the television development process. Both of these stories are super personal to me. They're not roles maybe that I would play, but they're roles that I think about, like, these will be actors who will get to play nuanced roles that represent the Indian American community. They represent people who happen to be Indian American, and that feels really important to me. And also, you know, so the big push, I think, for actors of kind of my generation was like, please don't make me do an Indian accent, you know, and because the reason was that the Indian accent was a joke and it was meant to be illicit humor. And now I think, okay, who is this character? What is their story? And if it's an immigrant and they have an accent, like, let's lean into how beautiful that person is because of the way they sound. And so I think my approach to the kinds of roles I'm seeking out feels very different. Like, there's not a sense of pride of like, hey, I'm brown, but I'm playing a white guy. You know, like, that's, to me, is not that interesting anymore.
I think you're touching on something that's really interesting. I think you're also talking about a sense of belonging, one, but it goes beyond representation too. What do you think helps cultivate a sense of safety in celebrating and affirming one's identity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, and I'm just going to kind of like sort of talk about this in terms of the school world, you know, because so much of what I do is now is like, I want young kids to be able to see themselves in books and TV and movies in a way that in the way that I didn't, because I think that that's so important. But apart from seeing yourself in a story, I think something that creates a sense of safety and belonging and inclusion is having your story valued by others. And I think that's a reason why having a kid who's not Indian American or not gay read one of my books and say, like, I relate to that kid is super important, because it's allowing yourself to understand someone who might be in your classroom just a little bit better. So to me, I think it's about feeling like your identity and your story are valued by the people around you, whether or not they actually identify completely with you. Which, by the way, is something that we talk about with like allyship and anti-bullying work so much, is you don't have to fully understand why something is hurtful to someone to be able to stand up for them and say, I see this as hurting you, how can I help you?
A major theme, as we know, throughout the National Education Summit and the Smithsonian's overall education work is fostering a sense of belonging. We heard Monique share that earlier, and you've been touching on that throughout your talk. So this phrase, fostering a sense of belonging, it's foundational to your work as an activist and an author. You chaired and co-founded the anti-bullying nonprofit organization Act to Change, which recently celebrated its 5th birthday, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I know that it was beyond the 5 years, it was more years before that leading up to the development of Act to Change. It's an amazing organization. I highly recommend checking them out online. You are also the author of 2 inspirational and celebrated books right here, The Best at It, which was a 2020 Stonewall Award winner, and Nikhil Out Loud. Congratulations on those books as well.
Thank you.
We're going to shift a little bit in talking about your work as an activist and as an author. We're going to start with Act to Change. How was Act to Change born, and what do you and your amazing team do with Act to Change?
Thank you. Just so I don't take away from someone else, the Best at It actually was a Stonewall Honor winner. It didn't win the award. And Nikhil Out Loud just did win the Lambda Literary Award, which is like really nice. Thanks. Act to Change. So Act to Change. I'll try to do this like kind of quickly. But just in terms of the story of identity and representation, there came a moment where my acting career was visible enough that I was being asked to speak at like nonprofits and social policy organizations. And I only bring that up because it was like a real pivotal moment for me, because again, like I'd spent so much of my life trying to run away from the very things that people were now asking me to speak about, whether it was being Asian American or being LGBTQ. And it was a moment where I had to make the decision of like, am I going to step into the spotlight as myself, or am I going to just do it through my work as an actor? And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna like go to these organizations. I'm gonna speak, and through working with nonprofit organizations, I got appointed by President Obama to serve on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And when I went to the White House, as you can imagine, there was 20 commissioners from across the country, and everybody was far more immersed in the work than an actor was. There were a lot of like social policy people there, and people working in economic justice and healthcare reform. And I was like, how am I going to prove myself in this room? And the previous commission had started some work on anti-bullying, but it wasn't complete. And I was like, well, that's something I can relate to. As a kid, I felt different a lot. I experienced bullying a lot. I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong. And so I took up the mantle of it. And what we did is we did 29 listening sessions around the country with teachers and students and educators. And we basically came away with all this qualitative data on how Asian American and Pacific Islander youth were experiencing bullying. And what we knew at that time was that in certain parts of the country, 65% of Asian American kids were reporting experiencing bullying, which was twice the national average. And there wasn't a campaign to speak to the unique way that Asian American kids were being bullied. So we formed Act to Change. It was initially a White House campaign, and the mission at that time was to increase reporting so that the Department of Justice could get involved. As the Obama administration came to a close, we realized that, I just want to be careful about how I say this, asking people to report to the Department of Justice for certain communities was no longer a safe place. And so we moved the campaign outside of the White House and reformed as a national nonprofit 5 years ago. And today, we're really a public awareness campaign. We offer programming and services. We work on policy recommendation, and gathering as much data as we can to really understand the issue and solve it where it's actually happening.
Can I ask us a follow-up to that? Why is it important to you and the team at Act to Change to address anti-bullying in the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander youth community?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that when we started as a White House campaign, the Asian American and Pacific Islander diaspora is very all-encompassing, and we don't look alike, but we're both part of the same community. In 2015, we were although East Asian kids were experiencing a large rate of bullying, a lot of our work was focused on Sikh kids who wore turbans to school, Muslim kids, immigrant kids. Post-COVID, that number of 65% has gone up to 80%. 80% of Asian American kids are reporting being bullied, and now, while those initial groups are still experiencing bullying, a lot of kids who just look like they're East Asian are experiencing really high rates of bullying. And so for us, I think a lot of the people on that board, it's something that we're an all volunteer working board. A lot of us have experienced bullying. A lot of us have a very deep personal connection to it. And I think our mission is to create, I know our mission, I think the reason we're so entrenched in this work, our mission is to create a world where all young people can celebrate their identities. And we know that you can't eradicate bullying for one group of kids without eradicating bullying for all kids. So we work in solidarity with all marginalized communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another follow-up to that. Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Do you have a sense for what the impacts have been for the advocacy work and the resources that you've made available for young people?
Yeah, do I have a sense of the impacts?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have such amazing programs, and they've all kind of started out of a very direct need. So we created a program, which, by the way, I would love to bring to anyone's school here. If anyone wants to find me, we're at act2change.org, if that's okay for me to plug. We created a program called Homeroom. It started with Tan France, who is a TV personality on Queer Eye. Tan was on our advisory council, and he's like, I want to meet kids directly. So we created this program called Homeroom with Tan, where schools would apply to win a visit with Tan. And the way you would do that is say, like, here are the problems we're facing in our school. And also, if we get a visit with Tan, we will commit to systemic change. And that change could look like, we had HarperCollins donate books by BIPOC authors. We would ask that you hold something around Asian American Heritage Month, an anti-bullying assembly. There was like a whole list of things that schools could commit to doing. That program has now grown. It's called Homeroom, and a lot of other influencers step in and go to schools. We have found that when we do post-school surveys with students, that 99% of them say that their lives have been positively impacted by that program, and that they have a better sense of their own identity and a better sense of being able to handle bullying when it comes up in their schools.
Wow.
So that kind of impact feels really, really huge.
Absolutely.
And apart from that, I got to say, like, we just had our gala, which you were so kind to attend in DC. We have a youth ambassador program for high school kids. I'm just going to share like one story, and I hope sharing like an individual story doesn't make me sound like a politician up here, but a youth ambassador, someone who'd been through our program, came in from rural Maine with her father. They drove in to DC, which I don't think is like the easiest of trips. She's Korean American. Her dad is white. Her mom wasn't there, but I believe both of her parents are white. She's adopted. She goes to a school in rural Maine. Her dad pulled me aside and said, going through one of your programs was the first time she got to be with kids like her, and the impact that it has had on her now going back to her school and being able to celebrate who she is has been nothing short of overwhelming. And so that kind of direct impact feels extremely meaningful.
Oh, that's so powerful. And there's an annual, like a conference too.
Yeah, so every year we hold our National AAPI Day Against Bullying and Hate, where we rally cities and states around the country. We bring together influencers, people who are way more famous than me to support it. We bring together youth, of course. Historically, it's involved panels, it's involved educational opportunities, and then this year it ended with an in-person gala, which is really exciting. And then in October, we hold a youth conference where youth can actually get together, and it's more youth-driven.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And congratulations on all the work with Act to Change.
Thank you.
Bridging and following this thread of fostering a sense of belonging and representation and celebrating one's identity, and also being around others that look like you and maybe have had similar lived experiences as you. I'm thinking about your role as an author. Why is it important for you to bridge fiction with authentic storytelling?
Wow, that's a really good question. Mostly because I don't know how to write stories that are deeply personal. I'm always like, wow, someone wrote a sci-fi book. Where did they come up with those ideas? My first novel, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to kind of tell my story in a fictional sense because that, like, write what you know. But I will say this. I think that what I found as an actor, and now I'm finding in the literary world, is if we don't tell our stories in an authentic way, they will be told incorrectly. That I will in fact be limited to being a foreign exchange student who eats fried camel. I don't even know if people actually eat fried camel, but someone wrote that as a joke because I don't get to talk about the things that I actually do in my culture. And so in both of my books, I've tried to create authentic characters who are not me. Anyone who writes out here knows that part of the writing process, you set out with an idea of a character, and then the character sort of takes on a life of their own, and they start telling you, like, you're wrong. Actually, this is what I want to do. And so these are fictional characters, but what the authenticity behind it is lived experience, nuance, humanity, things that I feel like if I didn't... In 2016, when I had the idea for The Best at It, I couldn't find that book. I think in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's been a burst of more diverse books, which has been really, really exciting. Authors of color, queer literature, certainly we need more. And I also think that there's a lag time, as you all know, that for middle grade novels particularly, you all are the gatekeepers. So like, it's not like, hey, we gotta like have a huge event at Barnes & Noble. It's like, no, we gotta get these books on lists that teachers and librarians can find out about them. And then they have to be approved to put in schools, which I'm sure we're gonna talk about. And that's been obviously a struggle because I feel like the more we're willing to tell our authentic story, the more people who are afraid of authentic stories are like, we're gonna shut that down. So yeah, I think that's why the gap, I don't know if that answers your question, but bridging that gap between authentic stories, I'm not sure if it answers your question, but that's what I'm going to say about it.
That's great. I think that's great. Well, I think so much of storytelling can be an act of activism. I think activism is, in many ways, storytelling. I think on the flip side of that previous question, you touched on this a little bit. What would you say are the dangers of limiting or prohibiting the ability to tell your authentic story?
Yeah. So I'm curious, because like I don't know the makeup of the room, but is anyone here facing book bans in their own school system? You don't have to. Maybe that's an awkward question. You are. Yeah. Sorry, you can raise your hand. I just didn't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to. Raise your hands! I mean, sorry. I just, like, something I realized, like, maybe you don't want to be on, I don't know if you're on camera or not, but when I was a kid, I couldn't find those books because they didn't exist. Now, I feel like so many authors like myself are trying to put stories that we know kids need. I know I needed those stories when I was a kid. We're trying to put them on shelves in school libraries, and they're being pulled off the shelves. And to me, that message to a kid, like, it's one thing to say, oh, your story doesn't exist. It's another thing to say, oh, you exist, but we don't want you to exist. That is incredibly demeaning and dangerous, and I can only imagine the mental health issues that we're going to see coming out of that. And I will just share that in 2019, I went on tour with The Best at It. And part of going on tour with middle grade novels is you go to middle schools, as I'm sure a lot of you know. And I went to a middle school in Ohio where I was born, and it was 700 kids in this auditorium. It was the entire middle school. And I walked out and I was like, oh my gosh. You know, we did listening sessions for Act to Change, but they were like 15 people, 20. We tried to keep them safe and insular. I had not been in a middle school auditorium since middle school. And in middle school, I was like, I'm straight, I'm white. You know, like that was my game. And so to go up and be like, now I'm going to be a brown person who's gay in front of 700 middle schoolers felt terrifying. And I said, hey, my book is about a 12-year-old kid who is just beginning to realize that he might be gay. 700 kids started clapping. And I was like, what is happening? And then as part of my presentation, I go, you know, I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I live there with my husband, and 700 kids started clapping. And I was like, what is going on? And then, because this kid struggles with feeling different, I have a slide that I throw up and it says, have any of you ever felt different? And much like I just did just now, I'm like, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want, because I know it can be uncomfortable. And like all these hands go up, right? And I haven't moderated with kids in this way ever. So I'm like, okay, maybe we don't want to go into like, so I'm moving on to the next slide, and these hands stay up. And so I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a risk. And I call on a kid. Sorry, this makes me like a little emotional. And he took off his baseball cap and he said, I have alopecia and I have no hair, and sometimes kids make fun of me for being bald. And I don't know if he'd ever said that to his entire middle school before, but maybe this answers the question before that I never got to answer properly, is I think that's why authentic storytelling in fiction is so powerful, because a story about a 12-year-old brown kid who's discovering that he might be gay led a white-presenting kid to take off his baseball cap and say to all of his friends, it's hard when you make fun of me for having alopecia. I left that school. 3 days later, a group of parents were angry that an openly gay author had come to their school. This was in 2019, before like all these coordinated legislatively backed book bans that we're seeing. They shut down school assemblies. They said a lot of horrific things about me online, about me trying to sexualize their kids, which felt very, here's how it felt. I was still on book tour, so I was alone in a hotel room in Denver when I saw this online, so I felt very alone. And the first thing I felt was shame. The first thing I felt was, what did I do wrong? And it felt like a 12-year-old feeling, like being in middle school, being like, why are they making fun of me? I don't get it. What did I do wrong? Did I act too gay? It felt like that. Now I'm angry. I don't feel that shame. But I think that is also what we have to remember. When we send that message to young people, that sense of shame is what we are driving, and that is not okay. It's not okay. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, yes. Okay, tissues here if you need one. I think that sense of shame is something that is so deeply inside everyone, and it's always really, it can really startle you when something happens. You're like, oh, I'm kind of back to my middle school self, or back, it's a time machine, those emotions. I think in thinking about the reaction to your presence at that school and to your works, I'm wondering, I would love to know if you've heard from young readers who have read your books and reached out to you to talk about what it meant for them to read your stories.
Yeah. It's I'm sure you all know who Kelly Yang is.
Oh, yes.
She's written a million books, and they're all amazing, and she has a book that came out recently called Finally Seen. And as part of it, you can go to her website. I don't know why I'm plugging. Hey, Kelly. I'm like plugging Kelly Yang.
We love Kelly.
You can go to. She's amazing. You can go to her website, and kids, you have to like. It's a very systematic. Like you have to get a parent to approve that you're going on the website. Kids can go on there and write about a time when they finally felt seen. And it's been like really, really heartwarming to see kids talk about my books on Kelly Yang's website, which is very, very exciting. I have seen it. I've seen it. I've experienced it on a lot of levels. I went back to my own middle school on book tour, and a kid stopped me in the hall, an Indian American kid, and he started crying and trying to tell me what it meant for him to see me on TV. And I was like, wow. And this is, however many years later, I never saw myself on TV. For him to say, like, you were the first time I saw myself on TV felt huge. The books, I hear it from kids all the time. Like sometimes parents will even send me a video of their kid, which is like phenomenal. I recently got a letter from someone, and she's actually in her 20s, and she was like, I'd never seen myself in a book until I read your book, and this book's about a 12-year-old. And I think it just, for me, it emphasizes how these stories are starting to be out there in the world, but there's still not enough of them, and access to them is so important. Like creating spaces where kids can find them is really, really important.
It sounds like you were maybe healing her inner child.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
I love to read children's literature, young adult books, and it's incredible how many Asian American authors are, on the bookshelves for young readers, and it's I'm a big fan. My home library is mostly authors of young adult fiction.
I love that.
And thinking on back to storytelling and looking into this room, we have an audience full of educators, librarians, caregivers, and storytellers from across the U.S. They're here with us right now, and they're watching online. And we're so thrilled to have all of you in the room with us here at the Hirshhorn. Excuse me. I want to go back before, as a way to kind of close our conversation, going back to the beginning of our conversation, talking about young Maulik, reflections of who you were as a young person. Is for everyone here, what messages do you have for this incredible community about the power of unapologetic storytelling?
Yeah. I will say this, and this might be hyperbole, but I don't think it is. I feel like teachers saved my life, like having a middle school drama teacher who said, you can do this. Our librarian, my sister and I talk about her fondly, Carol McCammon, huge shout out to her. The library was a safe space. I recently spoke at the Utah Educational Library Media Association. It was 400 educators and librarians in Utah, and they're facing a lot of book bans. They're facing a lot of fear. And I got to hang out with librarians before, and they talked to me about having to do things that I'm assuming none of you ever signed up to do, like going to state legislature meetings and fighting, having to have private WhatsApp groups because the Department of Education email feels threatening, being nervous that if you hand a book to a kid that has two boys kissing in it, you might be thrown in jail for disseminating pornography. And it was super emotional for me to hear about what you all are facing on the front lines. And I just guess that I would like to say that the fight is hard. It's exhausting. As an activist, the work with Act to Change, I can tell you this, that during COVID, there was so much media attention on anti-Asian hate, and so funding was so much easier. Now, no one's talking about it. I love the symbol for money, by the way. I was like, I heard that. Now no one's talking about it, but the numbers are going up, and it's so much harder to get funding behind our programming. So I just want to say that I empathize. I know how hard it is, but just know that each of you has the power to save a life. I don't know why I'm laughing at that, because it's not hyperbole. I apologize. If I was in therapy right now, I just want to bring everything back. They'd be like, why are you laughing at that? So I just want to say thank you to all of you. And I just want to acknowledge that we don't always get it right. And it's important that we hold institutions accountable when we're getting it wrong, and that we continue to fight the fight, and that there are people whose voices need to be heard. There are places that we need to create opportunities for certain stories to get into the world because they haven't had the opportunity to get there before. And even though that fight might be challenging, to know that there's a community around you who will be behind you in that fight. So take the time to rest. Take the time to rest when you need it, but please keep fighting the fight, because there's a young kid out there who depends on you for it.
The final question, speaking to that young kid, all the young kids that we have in our life, as an unapologetic storyteller yourself, what messages of hope do you have for them, for young people who may be watching this now, young people who will be reading your book and seeing you on screen?
Yeah. Whenever I visit schools, I am like, these kids are amazing. I feel like the kids are the ones who give me hope. And so imparting a message of hope to young people feels sort of like I'm going to give it my best shot. But I will say this, that whenever I do school visits, it seems like invariably there's one or two kids who hang back and come up to say hi. Often it's a kid of color, often it's an LGBTQ kid. And the stories I hear are, and I also just want to say, like, as queer literature has grown, it's still so much harder for trans stories and non-binary stories. My books have been banned in parts of this country, but I know, I'm very good friends with authors like Kyle Lukoff, who, like, the bans that they are facing are atrocious. And there's always a kid who comes up to me and says, something along the lines of just, thank you for being here because I needed to see you. And so what I would say as a message of hope for these kids is, like, we're here. we're here for you. Like, come find us. Like, if you're struggling, if you're feeling unsafe, there is a community out here to welcome you with open arms. That's the message I would say to young kids. To those young kids, I would say, keep living your ideals. I don't like to think of my books as message books, because everyone poo-poos on message books. I like to think of them as great stories, and hopefully you read them and you fall in love with the characters, and you're like, you get to that last page and you're like, no, I don't want it to end. That's my hope for both of my books. But if I had to assign them a message, with the best edit, I often think of it as being different is your superpower. That this kid learns that he can just be the best at being himself in all his different glory. And with Nikhil Out Loud, it is about living out loud. And so the message I would say to kids is be yourself unapologetically, and it's up to us to listen to them, because they have a lot of amazing things to say.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Our conversation will continue with Q&A. My good friend Ashley has.
All right, thanks everybody. From the virtual audience, we have a question. What tangible resources does Act to Change and APAC offer educators?
Yeah, do you want me to take that first? Or,
Sure.
Okay.
Well, actually,
go for it.
Our organizations did something together.
Yeah.
So on our website, apa.si.edu, it has changed recently. Very glad I remember that. We have on our website our education page called Learning Together. And if you scroll down on that page, there is a downloadable PDF called Kindness Heals. This is something that APAC and Act to Change did in 2020. In response to the rise of anti-Asian hate. And it's something that can be done with young people. It can be done at home. It can be done in the classroom. It's a 3-page activity booklet where you can write a message of hope on a face mask. You can also write a letter to your future self. kind of tapping into what you are experiencing now and how you see yourself in the future. But it also provides a page where you can write down who your support network is. So when things get really tough, who do you know you can turn to? Family, friends, anyone in your close circle. There are other resources there that are digital that shed more light on the diversity and the immense beauty of just how big our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities are. And they're all essentially about storytelling. So that's sort of what we have in common in our work is driving that lived experience as expertise, that lived experience as stories. So
yeah. And just to share like a fun story about how Kindness Heals was kind of born is we did a series of virtual conversations. Act to Change did a series of virtual conversations during the pandemic called COVID Convos, and we'd invite like sort of big influencers or people from government or whatever to come talk to kids about what was going on. And we had Randall Park on from Fresh Off the Boat. I don't know if you guys watched that show. And we did at the end of every conversation we'd say like we called it the table of kindness. And the idea was like what could you do at home to practice kindness in a time when people were feeling really isolated. And then that kind of expanded to like, how can you practice kindness outside? And Randall was like, if you're at the supermarket, like give the cashier a piece of paper that says thank you for working while the rest of us get to stay home. And everybody was like, you can't hand them paper. It could have COVID on it. Like with that's where we were, And so someone was like, well, you could tape it inside your mailbox to the mail carrier. And so these ideas grew, and out of like that was literally the beginnings of this big program that we then did with the Smithsonian called Kindness Heals. I would just say that also at acttochange.org, we have a number of downloadable resources, including, and I think this is great for this audience, we've developed curriculums. A lot of them came out of our homeroom program and our youth ambassador program, and they're actually like PDFs of teachable things and activities that you can do in your school around bullying, around identity, and so we have a lot of resources actually. And then also on that, we have a lot of our published studies around the data that we have around bullying, which I think is super important for people to understand what the issues are.
One thing I would add, another thing we have in common with our organizations is the 5th anniversary of Act to Change. The event was held on Vincent Chin's birthday. So if you don't know who Vincent Chin is, he was a young man who was unfortunately beaten to death on his bachelor, like a stag night almost. And there is an incredible guide written by Helen Zia that the Asian Pacific American Center helped to support, called the Vincent Chin Legacy Guide. If you Google the Vincent Chin Institute, you can download the guide, and it's been translated into a number of Asian languages to be read by many families from across the country. And Act to Change has many resources about Vincent Chin as well. So if you're unfamiliar with the Vincent Chin story, I would highly recommend looking into that.
Yeah, and something just to say about that Vincent Chin story and why we use that day to celebrate our National AAPI Day Against Bullying and Hate. We do it on his birthday, and the reason is that Vincent Chin's murder was one of the first times that the AAPI community came together in a really truly galvanized way to say like, we are one community and we demand justice. And so it's actually like, I think it's a really important day for the diaspora in a way. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great. We have another question. So this one is actually for young Maulik and young Andrea. So what celebrations or support do you wish your past educators had done in the classroom?
That's a big one.
Wow. Yeah, that is a big one. This is always a complicated question because I feel like what you have to find that balance, I think, between othering and celebrating. And I can say that in communities where there's, like when I was very young in elementary school, we were like the only Indian family in town. And so I think I'm trying to think of a nuanced way to answer that on the spot, and I don't actually fully know. I don't know if you I don't know why I jumped in. I have nothing to say.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And I feel like we could be here all night talking about this, and then we can call our therapist and to join us.
There you go.
I mean, I would say I'm thinking that's such an interesting question. I'm thinking to my young self. So I identify as a mixed race Korean American woman. I'm also a military brat. Growing up in the Navy is a big part of my childhood. I went to Department of Defense education activity schools. I moved around every 4 years, always had new friends. Always had to be that new kid showing up in the cafeteria and learning how to be extroverted enough to introduce myself and make friends. And it got harder and harder, especially in middle school and high school. I think one thing, I was reflecting on this recently, I'm going to shout out an educator friend of mine, Tony De La Rosa. We were talking about this and sort of the military experience and how there are so many young Asian American kids who grow up in the military, and a lot of kids of color who are also mixed. And I remember as an elementary student, there were so many educators who refused to accept my identity and would say, no, you don't look Asian, I will tell you what you are. Or you don't have black hair, that's brown hair. Or you don't look Asian, so you're something else. Wow. And so always having that fight to say, no, this is who I am, this is how I identified, this is my family, just became this really difficult battle. So I would say if you have Asian American students in your classroom, know that they can also be Asian American Latinx. They can be Asian American and Black. They could be Asian American and white. They could be Asian American and Native American. And there are so many other mixes out there, and there's so many multitudes in our identities. And it's so important to accept our whole selves, even if we may not look the way you may perceive one to look.
Yeah, and just to, I think to add on to that and to also maybe explain away my confusion around how to answer the question is I think part of it is every community is so specific, and bringing the families that you're trying to celebrate to the table to ask about ways to celebrate that would uplift them actually feels like an important thing to do, I think. I don't know, I'm looking right at you as though, just because where is the internet? Whoever asked that question. But I do think bringing the right people to the table to say what would be a way to celebrate your culture feels important.
That's a great answer, thank you. One last question. So as a fellow person of color but not Asian Pacific Islander, how can I support past just being an ally without having the same experiences of the community? And so I think that's building on some of the things that you've talked about already too.
We're both looking at each
other.
Who wants to take that one first?
I know. These are really great questions. I feel like this is something that really started to become very present through the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was about the incumbency, if that's a word, on educating ourselves around issues, because these issues, I hesitate to even use the word issues, but we are all one, we are all part of a big community. And so to say, my instinct around that question is that if to support other people is to get to know them in a way, and that part of that is taking the time to actually care about educating yourself around history, stories, culture. And I think, by the way, we didn't really even get to talk about this so much outside of books, but I think this is why it's so important that histories be taught in school in truthful ways, is because that is where education starts, in the classroom. And we wouldn't have to do so much work now as adults to educate ourselves on the history of this country if we'd actually learned it properly in elementary school.
Mm-hmm. I would say that, right, yeah. I heard of yes. I think to add on to that, something that I was talking with a colleague this morning is the process of always unlearning as much as you're unlearning. And I think I realize the older I get and the more I continue to dive into this work is I really don't know much at all. And I'm learning a lot from listening to you, listening to others in the room. And I think just kind of taking a step back and taking it all in to learn what your differences are, what your commonalities are, what your intersecting stories are can go a really long way.
Well, that was pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Could you please join me in thanking Andrea and Maulik? So the learning continues tomorrow, or the unlearning perhaps continues tomorrow. We're going to start off with our keynote in the morning at 10:30 with Dr. Pamela Cantor. You will not want to miss this session. She is a researcher, but she will help us understand the brain and the mind in ways that you never thought that you could fully understand it before. And then I will have a fabulous opportunity to talk with 4 students and talk more with them about their own personal learning journeys and how they have fostered a sense of belonging in different ways. And so it'll be a fabulous opportunity. I have to tell you that our closing session will include Bruno Mars. That's all I'm going to say. So you don't want to miss our 3 o'clock closing session tomorrow with the Fender Play Foundation and LA Unified School District and Bruno Mars. I'm going to end where Maulik picked up and just say thank you. Thank you for the work that you do each and every day. Thank you for each year continuing the commitment to be an educator, to be a teacher. And thank you for helping us be the best version of ourselves that we can be. We'll see you tomorrow.